It began on an evening smeared with the remnants of autumn, when the trees had shed their golden garb and the air hinted at the coming winter chill. I had been wandering the less frequented parts of the city, my camera slung around my neck, capturing the twilight as it caressed old buildings and empty streets. That's when I stumbled upon the flyer, a simple piece of paper taped to a lamppost in a dimly lit alley. Are you brave enough? Join us for the ultimate game of Pass the Parcel. Tonight. Midnight. The last warehouse on Milton Dock. Dare to play. Curiosity, that reckless whisper in my mind, nudged me toward what I told myself would be nothing more than an unusual photo opportunity. The address led to an abandoned part of the city where the warehouses stood like silent monoliths, relics of a bustling industrial past now forgotten. The chosen warehouse was at the far end, its large doors slightly ajar, spilling a sliver of light onto the cracked pavement. I hesitated only for a moment before my curiosity, now a roaring coal, pushed me inside. The interior was vast, larger than I had expected, with rows of empty shelves and a ceiling lost in shadows. At the far end, a circle of chairs was arranged, each one occupied except for one, which seemed to be waiting for me. The occupants were as varied as could be, a curious assortment of strangers, each with eyes that flickered with the same adventurous spark that had led me here. A woman with stark white hair and piercing blue eyes stood as I approached. "You're just in time," she said, her voice a soft lilt that contrasted sharply with the eerie silence of the warehouse. "We were waiting for one more." I took my place in the circle, my heart beating with a mix of excitement and an inexplicable sense of dread. "The game," the woman explained, "was simple. We pass a parcel around while music plays from an old record player sitting nearby. When the music stops, the person holding the parcel unwraps a layer. Inside each layer is a dare that must be completed before the game can continue." The music started, a scratchy tune that seemed to crawl under my skin. We began to pass a small, plainly wrapped box, each handover tinged with a nervous anticipation. The music stopped abruptly, and the parcel landed in my hands. Unwrapping the first layer, I found a note that read, "Whisper your deepest fear into the ear of the person on your left." The task seemed simple enough, harmless even. Leaning toward the young man beside me, I whispered of my fear of being forgotten, a truth I had never voiced aloud. He nodded solemnly, his eyes briefly clouded with what seemed like a flicker of something darker, something sad. The game continued, the music and the parsing becoming more frantic with each round. With every stop of the music, the dares grew stranger, more personal. One woman was asked to confess a lie she had told that day, her voice trembling as she admitted to deceiving her husband. Another round had a man reveal a scar, each accompanied by tales that seemed too intimate, too raw for strangers. As the layers peeled away, so did our exteriors, revealing secrets and scars we hid from the world. It was during the fourth round, the music grinding to a halt yet again, that the atmosphere shifted palpably. The parcel was in my hands again, and the dare I unwrapped chilled me to the bone. Go to the center of the warehouse, close your eyes, and call out to the spirits of this place. The group's eyes were on me, intense and unblinking. Swallowing my fear, I stood and walked to the center of the room, the eyes of the strangers boring into my back. I closed my eyes, the silence enveloping me like a thick blanket. With a voice that trembled more than I cared to admit, I called out, "If there are any spirits here, make yourself known." The response was immediate and terrifying. A cold wind whipped through the warehouse, sending papers swirling and extinguishing the few candles that had bathed the room in a flickering glow. A loud bang echoed as something heavy fell in the darkness, followed by a soft, sinister whisper that seemed to come from right beside me. "We're here." Panic set in as the whispers grew, a chorus of unseen voices that filled the warehouse with their eerie song. The air grew thick, oppressive, as if the very atmosphere was alive with ancient, slumbering anger now awakened. I opened my eyes to see the circle of players staring at me, their faces pale in the dim light. But it was their eyes that held me frozen, a flicker of something not quite human danced in their depths. "We should stop," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper, as the air grew icy with a palpable sense of dread. But the white-haired woman who had greeted me shook her head slowly, a sinister smile curving her lips. "No, we must finish the game. It's the rule." The music started again, its melody now seeming more like a dirge than anything meant for a game. Reluctantly, I made my way back to my chair, the eyes of the group following my every step. The parcel resumed its journey around the circle, each participant's hands trembling slightly as they passed it on. The room felt smaller, claustrophobic, as if the walls were inching closer with every beat of the haunting melody. The whispers hadn't ceased, they had grown into murmurs that rustled like dead leaves dragged by an unseen wind. It was during this round that the parcel came to a sudden stop in the hands of a young man across from me. He unwrapped the next layer to reveal his dare, which he read out loud with visible reluctance. "Reach into the darkness beyond the circle, feel what lies within." As he hesitantly extended his arm beyond the ring of faint candlelight, a silence fell over the room, heavy and expectant. His fingers disappeared into the shadow, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, without warning, he screamed, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the murmur and the music. When he pulled his hand back, his face was ghostly pale, his eyes wide with terror. Clutched in his hand was a small, old doll, its face cracked and its eye sockets empty. "This shouldn't be here," he whispered, his voice cracking. It grabbed it from something. The music stumbled and halted, as if startled by his scream, and the warehouse plunged into a deeper silence, one that seemed to throb with the heartbeat of the building itself. The game continued, each dare more disturbing than the last. One participant was asked to sing a lullaby to an unseen child who, the card claimed, died in the warehouse many years ago. Another was instructed to draw a door on the wall with chalk provided in the parcel and knock thrice, supposedly to invite spirits to join us. Each task was met with hesitance but was completed under the watchful gaze of the group, particularly the enigmatic woman whose idea of a game seemed increasingly macabre. As my turn approached once again, the atmosphere was thick with a mix of fear and resignation. The parcel, now significantly smaller, felt heavy in my hands as I peeled away another layer. The card inside was cold, and I read the printed words with a sinking heart. "Confess your greatest sin to the darkness, for it already knows, and merely wants to hear it spoken." Swallowing hard, I stood, my voice echoing oddly in the vast, empty space. I once wished someone dead, I admitted, the memory of a dark moment in my life surfacing despite years of trying to bury it. And not long after, they were killed in an accident. The moment the words left my lips, a chill swept through the warehouse, as if my confession had opened a door to something cold and unyielding. The murmurs grew louder, more distinct now, as if the shadows themselves were whispering amongst themselves, savoring my admission. The game spiraled on, the challenges delving deeper into the personal and the paranormal, blurring the lines between them until it was unclear where one ended and the other began. With each round, the circle felt smaller, the warehouse larger, and the shadows deeper. It was when the final layer of the parcel came into view that the true nature of the game revealed itself. The last dare was for all of us, a collective task that had to be completed together. Stand hand in hand, the card read, and do not let go, no matter what. Close your eyes and count to 100. Welcome them. Reluctantly, we joined hands, forming a chain of trembling fingers and sweaty palms. As we closed our eyes and began to count, the air around us grew oppressively tight, as if the very breath was being squeezed from the room. Somewhere around 30, the floor began to vibrate, a low rumble that crescendoed into a cacophony of bangs and clangs, as if the warehouse itself was coming apart. Despite the terror that urged me to flee, to open my eyes and break the circle, we held on, our count unsteady but unbroken. The sounds grew into an orchestra of chaos, shrieks, crashes, the roar of wind, the whispers now loud enough to be shouts, angry and mournful all at once. Yet, through it all, we kept our eyes shut, our hands clenched, counting towards what felt like an inevitable conclusion. As we neared 100, the noise reached a fever pitch, the air shivered with the intensity of a storm. At 98, 99, 100, the final count was uttered like a prayer, and suddenly, an eerie silence enveloped us. Tentatively, we opened our eyes. The warehouse was changed, the dim lights that had flickered sporadically were now extinguished, leaving us in a gloom pierced only by the thin, grey light of pre-dawn seeping through the grimy windows. Our circle was intact, but around us, the shadows seemed thicker, almost palpable, as if they were watching, waiting. A cold dread settled over the group. The game, it appeared, was not just a game, and the reality of our situation sank in. We were not alone. Whatever we had called to with our counting, it had heard, and it had come. The woman with the white hair, the instigator of this twisted game, spoke first, her voice a whisper that barely reached us over the thick silence. Now they will choose, she said. This is the part of the game not revealed until the end. They will choose one of us to stay with them. Panic fluttered through the circle like a dark bird. Murmurs broke out, nervous glances exchanged. What do you mean, stay with them? Demanded the young man who had earlier retrieved the doll from the darkness. What have you brought us into? Before she could answer, the air shifted, the temperature dropping so suddenly that our breath fogged before us. Then, starting from one end of the warehouse, a soft, skittering sound filled the air, growing louder, like 1,000 tiny whispers converging into one. It was the sound of something old, something eager, something that had not been in the world of the living for a very long time. The shadows around us began to move, coalesce, form into shapes that were almost human, yet so twisted and distorted that looking at them was almost painful. They circled us slowly, their movements erratic, twitching as if they were puppets jerked by unseen strings. We need to leave, I hissed, my voice low, trying not to draw attention from the swirling mass of shadows. Now. No, the woman said firmly, her eyes alight with a feverish intensity. We cannot break the circle. Not until they have chosen. It is the only way. As the shadows drew closer, the air filled with the scent of decay, a sweet, cloying odor that made my stomach churn. The figures were clearer now, their features ghastly, sunken eyes, gaping mouths, and limbs that bent at impossible angles. One by one, they approached, each stopping in front of a player, staring with empty eyes as if judging, choosing. My heart pounded so fiercely I feared it would burst. Beside me, a young woman whimpered, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Finally, one of the figures stopped in front of me. It was taller than the others, its presence commanding, its eyes deeper, darker, more intelligent. It stared at me, and in its gaze, I felt an overwhelming sorrow, a despair so deep it threatened to drown me. "You," it hissed, its voice a sibilant echo that filled the room. "You will stay." The circle broke instantly as the figure reached for me, its fingers long and thin, tipped with nails that looked like the claws of a bird. Screams erupted around me as the group scattered, breaking away in a blind panic. But I was frozen, caught in the gaze of the creature, unable to move, unable to scream. Its hand touched my arm, cold as ice, and I felt a sharp pain, then nothing at all. When I awoke, the warehouse was silent, bathed in the light of early morning. I was lying on the cold, hard floor, alone. The others were gone, and the place was empty, the only sign of the night's horrors being the abandoned chairs forming a broken circle. I staggered to my feet, my body aching, my mind reeling. The door was ajar, just as it had been when I entered, as if inviting me to leave this place of nightmares behind. I walked out into the dawn, the air fresh and clean compared to the stale, corrupted atmosphere of the warehouse. As I left, I glanced back once, half expecting to see the shadows watching me go. But there was nothing, just an empty building and the rising sun painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. Yet, as I walked away, trying to convince myself that it had been a dream, a hallucination brought on by fear, I could not shake the feeling of being watched. And in my pocket, I felt the unmistakable weight of a small, old doll, its face cracked, its eye sockets empty. The game had ended, but something told me my part in this was far from over. Clutching the doll, I walked faster, each step away from the warehouse quickening with the desperate need to escape the lingering dread that clung to me like a second skin. The sun rose fully as I reached the more populated streets, the early morning workers and joggers casting curious glances my way, their eyes skimming over my disheveled appearance and the haunted look I could feel etched onto my face. I tried to blend in, to shake off the terror, but the echo of those whispering shadows was ingrained in my ears. The sense of normalcy that the daylight brought was superficial, and beneath it, a chilling certainty settled in my bones. I had been marked by whatever forces we had awakened in that warehouse. The game was over, but its effects were not. They clung to me, a spectral residue that I feared might never wash away. I hurried home, the need for a familiar sanctuary overwhelming. Once inside, I locked the door and leaned against it, the solid feeling of the wood scant comfort against the memory of spectral fingers brushing my skin. I set the doll on the table and stepped back, watching it warily as if it might move on its own. Its empty eye socket seemed to stare back at me, a silent accusation, or perhaps a warning. As hours passed, the initial terror gave way to an exhausting vigilance. I jumped at every sound, every shadow cast by the shifting daylight seemed sinister. Despite my exhaustion, sleep was elusive, haunted by the fear of what might come with closing my eyes. When night fell again, my apartment felt like a trap, the walls too close, every corner a hiding place for whispering shadows. Compelled by a mix of fear and an inexplicable pull, I found myself drawn to the doll again and again. Its presence was both terrifying and oddly comforting. It was a tangible piece of the nightmare, proof that I wasn't losing my mind. Yet, as I watched it, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me back, its blank gaze hiding secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Deciding I needed answers, I turned to the internet, typing with trembling fingers descriptions of the game, the warehouse, the shadows, anything that might tell me what had happened, what might still happen. Hours of scouring through forums, paranormal sites, and obscure blogs yielded little until I stumbled upon a thread buried in a forum dedicated to local urban legends and ghost stories. The thread was old, filled with discussions of strange happenings in the city, but one post caught my eye. It was a story about a warehouse on Milton Dock, where people were said to disappear decades ago, vanishing after participating in mysterious games orchestrated by an enigmatic figure with white hair. The post was vague, details blurred by time and retelling, but one line sent a shiver down my spine. They say once you play her game, you're never really free of it. She marks you. And sooner or later, she comes back for what's hers. My breath caught. The realization that my experience was not unique, that others had been drawn into this twisted game and suffered consequences, was both a relief and a new terror. I was not alone, but that also meant the danger was real and persistent. Determined to find more, I dug deeper, tracing connections between posts, following leads that spanned across different sources. Each piece of information was a small part of a larger, more horrifying picture. Accounts of hauntings, of people driven mad, of inexplicable phenomena centered around the area of Milton Dock painted a history of darkness and despair tied to that warehouse. As night deepened, a plan began to form. I couldn't let this go. I had to go back to the warehouse. I needed to understand what had been done to me, to all those who had sat in that circle. The thought of returning to that place of shadows filled me with dread, but the pull of needing to know, to perhaps find a way to break this connection, was stronger. I gathered a few things: salt, as some posts suggested, for protection, my camera, to document anything I saw, and, reluctantly, the doll, which might be a key to understanding the shadow's interest in me. As I prepared, the apartment seemed to grow colder, the shadows deeper, and somewhere, just on the edge of hearing, I thought I could hear a faint whisper, calling me back to the game that wasn't yet over. With a deep breath, I stepped out into the night, the streets empty and silent around me, the echoes of my footsteps a stark reminder of my isolation. The journey back to Milton Dock was a blur of fear and determination. As I approached the warehouse, the air grew tangibly colder, the darkness thicker. I paused at the entrance, the door ajar as it had been that first night, the darkness beyond a gaping maw waiting to swallow me whole. Taking a hesitant step inside, I felt the familiar oppressive silence envelop me, a silence that seemed to throb with unseen life. The weak beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, casting long, sinister shadows among the columns of empty shelves and abandoned equipment. Each step seemed to echo into the vast emptiness of the warehouse, attuned to the lurking quiet. As I moved deeper into the cavernous space, my mind replayed the events of the last game, each memory etched with vivid clarity. I paused near the circle of chairs, now just ghostly outlines in the dim light. A chill swept over me, not just from the cold air, but from the palpable sense of being watched. I set up a small circle of salt around myself, a fragile barrier against the unknown. With the doll placed in front of me, I tried to recreate the setting of the game, hoping to provoke a response or gain some understanding. My voice felt small and hollow as I called out into the darkness, I know I was brought here for a reason. Show me what you want from me. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of my own breathing. Then, almost imperceptibly, the air began to shift. The darkness seemed to pulse, thicken, and slowly, figures began to materialize. They were shadows at first, barely more than darker patches against the blackness, but gradually they took on the forms of the players from that night, their features ghastly under the flicker of my flashlight. The woman with the white hair appeared last, her figure emerging from the shadows with an elegance that belied her sinister presence. Her eyes found mine, and a cold smile spread across her lips. "You have returned," she said, her voice echoing strangely in the vast space. "But not to play. You seek answers. Knowledge requires sacrifice. Are you prepared to pay the price?" Her words hung in the air, a challenge and a warning. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. What happened here? Why am I marked? "You participated in a ritual older than time," she replied, her gaze piercing. "This place, these games, they are not mere entertainment. They are a gateway, a means to balance the scales between realms. Each player leaves a part of themselves here, a tribute to the spirits that dwell in the shadows." The other figures remained silent, their eyes hollow pits that seemed to bore into my soul. The air grew colder, the edges of my vision starting to blur as the temperature dropped. I could see my breath, each exhale a cloud in the flashlight's beam. "Why me? What do you want from me?" My voice was stronger now, driven by a mix of fear and anger. "You were chosen because you saw beyond the veil," she explained, stepping closer. The circle of salt seemed to hold her at bay, but her presence was overwhelming. "You have a gift, one that you have yet to fully understand or appreciate. You can bridge the worlds. That is a rare and precious skill." The shadows seemed to swirl around her, coalescing into forms that were almost human. "This is not just about what we want from you," she continued. "It is about what you are capable of becoming. You can be a mediator, a communicator between the human and the spirit. But such power is not granted lightly. It must be earned, proven." Her words struck a chord deep within me, a resonance with the unexplained experiences of my life, moments of intuition, of seeing things others could not, of feeling presences unseen. It was a truth I had always known but never faced. "What must I do?" I asked, the weight of my destiny settling around me like a cloak. "The first step is acceptance," she said, her voice softening. "Accept who you are and embrace your role. Then, you must learn the ways of the shadow and the light, the language of the spirits. We can teach you, guide you." I took a deep breath, considering her words. The decision loomed large, a path that once taken, could not be undone. The shadows watched, silent and expectant, their forms wavering like smoke in the cold air. "I need to think," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need time." The woman nodded, her expression unreadable. "Time is all we have," she replied. "We will be here when you are ready." As she faded into the shadows, the other figures followed, disappearing one by one until I was alone again in the darkness of the warehouse. The silence settled back in, heavy and absolute, as I turned off my flashlight and stepped out of the circle of salt. I left the warehouse with more questions than answers, the weight of my potential future heavy on my shoulders. As I walked back into the early morning light, the city around me felt different, as if I was seeing it for the first time through eyes newly opened. I walked the streets in a daze, the morning light unable to chase away the shadows that clung to the edges of my vision. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow a doorway to another realm. The city felt alive in a way it never had before, pulsating with unseen energies. My mind wrestled with the decision laid before me. To embrace a destiny as a mediator between worlds was both a gift and a curse. It promised a deeper understanding of the universe, but also a life forever caught between light and dark, forever responding to the call of spirits. As the day wore on, my determination solidified. If this was my path, I would not walk it blindly. I needed control, understanding. I returned to my apartment with a plan. I would accept the white-haired woman's offer, but on my own terms. First, I would research, prepare, and learn everything I could about this hidden world and my role within it. Days turned into weeks. My apartment became filled with books on the occult, spiritualism, and psychic phenomena. I practiced meditation, honed my intuition, and even began experimenting with minor rituals that strengthened my spiritual sensitivity. Each step forward made the shadows less intimidating, more familiar. I was ready. Returning to the warehouse felt like stepping into another world. The building was just as I remembered, the silence just as profound, but I was different. I walked with purpose to the center of the vast, empty space, the place where the game had changed everything. "I'm ready," I called into the darkness, my voice echoing off the walls. "I accept my role, but I demand guidance. Teach me." The air shifted, the temperature dropping as shadows began to coalesce around me. The figures of the game players appeared, their forms more defined than before, less threatening. The woman with the white hair materialized last, her presence commanding yet reassuring. "Very well," she said, her voice resonant in the still air. "Your education will begin. But know this, the path of a mediator is not easy. The challenges are great, and the stakes even greater." I nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I'm ready." Under her tutelage, I learned to communicate with the spirits, to understand their needs and help them find peace. Each encounter taught me more about the spiritual realm and my place within it. The warehouse, once a place of fear, became my sanctuary, a place of learning. But as my power grew, so did the darkness that sought to oppose it. A malevolent force, a shadow among shadows, became aware of my activities. It sought to corrupt what I had built, to turn my abilities to its own dark purposes. The final confrontation was inevitable. One night, as I mediated a particularly difficult crossing, the dark entity appeared. Its form was a vortex of shadows, spinning and chaotic, its presence chilling the air to frost. "You are meddling in affairs you do not understand," it hissed, its voice a cacophony of whispers. "This power is not for humans to wield." "I am not just human," I replied, my voice steady despite the fear that gripped my heart. "I am a mediator, and I will protect these spirits and this realm." The entity lunged, a swirl of darkness, but I was prepared. Using everything I had learned, I channeled my energy, my will, into a shield of light. The battle was fierce, the warehouse echoing with the clash of light and dark, but I stood firm. As dawn broke, the entity weakened, its form dissipating like smoke in the wind. Exhausted but victorious, I watched as the first light of morning filtered through the dirty windows of the warehouse. The battle was over, but my journey was not. I knew other dark forces would come, drawn by my light. But I also knew I was not alone. The spirits I had helped, the knowledge I had gained, and the allies I had made along the way stood with and within me. As I left the warehouse, the sun rising behind me, I felt a sense of peace. The city around me awoke to a new day, oblivious to the battle that had raged in the shadows. But I was awake, alert, and ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The game had ended, but my story, my true calling, was just beginning. As days turned into months, my reputation as a mediator between the living and the spirit realms grew. Word of my ability spread, not just among those who sought my help, but also among those who wished to exploit or challenge the balance I strove to maintain. Despite the risks, I continued my work, driven by a deep-seated belief in my mission. The warehouse on Milton Dock remained my anchor, a place where I honed my skills and faced the unknown. One evening, as the autumn winds began to whisper of winter's approach, I felt a stirring in the air, a chill that spoke of an impending confrontation. Drawn to the warehouse, I entered its vast, shadowy expanse with a sense of purpose. The darkness felt alive, pulsating with energy as if anticipating what was to come. As I moved to the center of the open space, the air thickened, and the faint glow of my lantern seemed to struggle against the encroaching gloom. I wasn't alone. From the shadows emerged figures, not just of the lost souls I had come to aid, but of something else, something ancient and malevolent. They circled me, a gallery of spectral forms that blurred the line between the ethereal and the corporeal. "You have meddled in the affairs of the eternal," a voice boomed, echoing through the cavernous room. It belonged to none other than the dark entity I had banished months before. It had returned, stronger and more furious than before. "Your light is an affront to the old ways, a disruption to the ancient order." "I stand for balance, not disruption," I declared, my voice reverberating with the power of my conviction. "I protect the innocent and guide the lost. I am the bridge between light and darkness. And I will not yield." With a roar that shook the foundations of the warehouse, the entity and its minions advanced. The air crackled with energy, a storm of spiritual power that threatened to overwhelm me. But I was not the same novice who had first played the game of Pass the Parcel. I had grown in both power and understanding. Drawing deep from the well of knowledge I had acquired, I raised my arms, summoning a barrier of radiant energy. The clash of light against darkness was blinding, a spectacle of otherworldly forces that sent shockwaves through the spiritual and physical realms. The battle raged, a dance of shadows and light, each of us pushing and pulling at the threads of reality. Just when my strength began to wane, the spirits I had aided came to my aid. They rallied around me, a legion of light against the darkness, their presence bolstering my power. Together, we pushed the dark entity back, forcing it into the corners of the warehouse. With a final surge of combined energy, we sealed it away, binding it with ancient runes that I had learned from the very books and mentors that had guided my journey. As calm returned, the spirits whispered their thanks, their voices a soothing balm to my weary soul. They faded away, returning to their rest, their unfinished business concluded, leaving me alone in the silent aftermath. I stood in the center of the warehouse, the first light of dawn peeking through the windows, casting long beams across the floor. The battle was over, but I knew my work would never be done. There would always be darkness lurking, always spirits in need of guidance, and always those who would seek to disrupt the balance I fought to maintain. As I left the warehouse, the sun rose fully, bathing the city in a golden glow. The world around me awoke, oblivious to the battles fought in the shadows. I smiled, a sense of peace settling over me. I was the mediator, the keeper of the balance, a guardian at the threshold of two worlds. The game of Pass the Parcel had led me here, to a destiny both daunting and divine. My journey began with a simple invitation, a game, but it had transformed into a calling, a call to stand at the borders of light and dark, to protect, to guide, and to enlighten. As I walked away from the warehouse, I glanced back one last time, knowing that it would always be there, a reminder of where I started and how far I had come. The city stretched out before me, alive with possibilities and unseen mysteries. With a steady heart and an unwavering spirit, I stepped forward into the light of the new day, ready for whatever came next, the echoes of the night's victory whispering like shadows at my back.